If you're going to run away from the world, you might as well pick a spot where the world can't follow. That was my philosophy, anyway. I'm Ethan. I'm the guy who traded spreadsheets and traffic lights for pine needles and quiet. And man, oh man, did I find the quiet. I had this little cabin, way up in the Bitterroot Mountains, right where Montana sort of shrugs into Idaho. It wasn't fancy. It was built about 80 years ago by some prospector, who probably went crazy from the isolation. But it had a solid roof and a wood stove that actually worked. That's all a man really needs when the snow is piling up outside like white cotton candy. I moved there 5 years ago. I wasn't running from the law or anything dramatic like that. I was running from noise, from expectations, from the constant buzzing static of modern life. I figured if I didn't have to talk to anyone, I couldn't disappoint anyone, and I certainly couldn't be disappointed myself. It was a clean slate, written in the language of chopping wood and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with smoke. My days settled into a rhythm that felt ancient. Up before the sun, hauling water from the creek before it froze solid, splitting enough firewood to keep the little cabin warm through the night. I'd walk the perimeter, check my meager garden patch in the summer, and fish the icy streams. It was peaceful, it was lonely, and for a long time, it was exactly what I wanted. I was alone, sure, but I wasn't unaware. The wilderness is always watching you. You learn to read the signs, the scratch marks of a bear on the old birch tree, the way the elk herd moves before a major storm, the sharp, startled whistle of a marmot warning every living thing within a mile that something was coming. For the first 4 years, the biggest excitement I had was watching a family of otters slide down the muddy bank of the river. Then, things changed. It was late autumn. The air had that crisp, metallic bite that tells you winter is serious this year. I was out checking my snares. I mostly caught rabbits and grouse, just enough to supplement the canned goods I hauled in twice a year, when I saw the tracks. Now, I know tracks. I know deer. I know coyote. I know bobcat. These tracks were different. They were huge. Not just big, but massive, easily the size of my outstretched hand, maybe bigger. They were perfectly spaced, deliberate, and they followed the creek line as if the creature knew exactly where it was going and didn't care who saw the evidence. A large dog, maybe? No. The stride was too long, too precise. It had that unmistakable gait of a wild predator, one that covers ground effortlessly, hour after hour. I knew what it was. A wolf. A big one. Wolves aren't unheard of in the Bitterroots, but they tend to stick to the highest ridges, far from human scent. They are shadows. They don't leave highway-sized footprints right next to where I draw my water. I felt a little knot tighten in my stomach. Not fear, exactly. More like respect mixed with a healthy dose of caution. This wasn't a coyote I could scare off with a shout. This was serious business. I started keeping my old Winchester rifle closer to the door. Not because I planned to use it, I hadn't shot anything bigger than a deer mouse in years, but just for the comfort of knowing it was there. The tracks became a daily feature. They'd appear overnight, always silent, always large. Sometimes they circled the edge of my clearing, stopping right at the line where the forest ended and my little patch of human mess began. It was like they were marking a perimeter, acknowledging my presence without challenging it. I started looking up from my work constantly. I'd be chopping wood, and I'd feel that prickle on the back of my neck, the ancient sense of being watched. Finally, I saw him. It was a cold, bright Tuesday. I was sitting on my porch step, peeling an apple, enjoying the last rays of weak sunlight before the valley plunged into shadow. I looked up towards the ridge, just a casual glance, and there he was. He was standing maybe 70 yards away, framed perfectly between two tall ponderosa pines. He was enormous, I mean truly magnificent, not the scrawny, tan-colored wolves you sometimes see in documentaries. This one was almost entirely black, the color of wet obsidian, with just a few streaks of gray around his muzzle, suggesting age and experience. He wasn't moving, he wasn't slinking, he was just standing there, statuesque, watching me. I froze with the apple halfway to my mouth. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare move my hand toward the door where the rifle lay. Instinct told me that any sudden movement would break this delicate moment, and he would vanish. His eyes, even from that distance, were chilling. They were a pale, piercing yellow, and they weren't scanning the area for game or danger. They were focused solely on me. It felt less like being observed and more like being assessed. We held that gaze for what felt like an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping against the silence of the woods. Then, very slowly, almost dismissively, he turned his head and walked into the deep shadows of the pines. No rush, no panic, just gone. Like he had finished his inspection for the day. I sat there for another 10 minutes, shivering despite the heavy flannel shirt I wore. I realized 2 things instantly. First, this wolf was massive, the alpha of whatever pack roamed these parts, maybe even a lone wolf that had grown too big and strong to tolerate others. Second, he knew exactly where I lived, and he was curious. The sightings became more frequent after that. He never came closer than 50 yards, but he was always there. Sometimes I'd catch him in the morning mist down by the creek when I was fetching water. He'd stand on the opposite bank, take a quick drink, lift his head, look straight at me, and then melt away into the brush. It was almost like we had established a routine, a silent agreement. I wouldn't bother him, he wouldn't bother me. But the agreement was more complicated than that, because he was clearly breaking the cardinal rule of the wild. Stay away from the human. He didn't seem afraid. That was the most unsettling part. Most wild animals, even big predators, have a healthy terror of humans. They see us, they smell us, and they bolt. This wolf, he just looked, with an intelligence I hadn't expected. My life, which I had crafted to be utterly predictable and solitary, suddenly had an audience. I started thinking about him constantly. I even started talking to him, though only in my head. "What are you doing? Why aren't you hunting?" It was driving me a little crazy. I'd come out of the cabin, and I'd scan the tree line searching for that black, silent shape. It was like living next door to a very large, very serious neighbor who never spoke but always watched you take out the trash. One evening, I made a mistake. I was cleaning out the remnants of a deer I had been processing. I found it already dead, thankfully a natural kill, and I tossed the scraps a little too close to the forest line, maybe 30 feet from my door. I figured the coyotes or ravens would clean it up overnight. The next morning, the scraps were gone, of course, but what caught my attention wasn't the empty spot. It was what was left behind. In the soft mud near the stump, someone, or something, had dug a shallow hole, and right in the center of that little depression lay a perfectly preserved gray jay feather. Now, a gray jay is a common bird up here, sure, but the placement was too neat, too deliberate. It wasn't dropped by accident. It was placed like a silent calling card. I picked it up. It was light and soft. I looked around the clearing, up at the shadows of the pines. Nothing. I sat back on my heels, the feather between my thumb and forefinger. Did the wolf leave this? Why? Was it a warning? A gift? Wolves don't leave gifts for humans. That's fairy tale stuff. But this big, black wolf wasn't behaving like a normal wild animal. He was studying me, and now it seemed he was communicating. I stopped leaving scraps out after that. I didn't want to encourage a dependence or worse, make him associate me with food. That's how you get a dangerous situation, where the wild boundary is crossed. I wanted the bond, the strange connection we were forming to remain pure, a mutual, silent acknowledgement of existence, not a transaction. The winter hit hard that year. The snow, coming down in thick, blinding sheets. The Bitterroots became a monochrome world of white and gray, and the solitude intensified. For weeks, I didn't see the wolf. The snow was too deep, the wind too fierce. I figured he had moved up to a higher, more sheltered area with his pack, or maybe he was hunkered down in a den. I felt a weird pang of disappointment. I'd gotten used to his silent presence, like a missing piece of scenery. I spent those weeks reading by the stove, mending my gear, and trying to keep the pipes from freezing. It was during this period of deepest isolation, when I hadn't seen another living soul, human or otherwise, for nearly a month, that the true test of this strange relationship began. I was running low on lamp oil. Stupid mistake. I had miscalculated my inventory. I needed to hike down the main logging trail to the cache I kept buried near the old county road. Idea about 6 miles away. It was a miserable trip in the thigh-deep snow, even on snowshoes. I packed light, a thermos of coffee, a couple of jerky strips, and my heavy winter coat. I strapped on the snowshoes and started out just before dawn. The walk was brutal. The snow was powdery and deep, and the wind had sculpted the drifts into treacherous waves. I was sweating inside my layers within the first hour. About 3 miles in, just as I was starting to feel that familiar, bone-deep exhaustion, I noticed something in the trail ahead. It wasn't tracks. It was a trail. Someone had broken the snow for me, not a machine. It was too narrow, too uneven for a snowmobile. It was a single file path, packed down firm enough that I could step into the depressions left by the snowshoes, making my own footing much easier. And those depressions, they were huge paw prints. The big black wolf. He had walked this trail recently, clearing the path, making the slog manageable. It was a perfectly straight line, cutting through the worst of the drifts, leading exactly where I needed to go. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't coincidence. Wolves don't wander 6 miles down a logging trail for fun in a blizzard. He was running a patrol, and he had done it just before I set out. I followed the trail, marveling at the sheer size and power it must have taken to plow through that much fresh snow. It saved me hours of effort and possibly prevented me from having to turn back. When I reached the cache, which was nothing more than a few sealed barrels hidden under a pile of stones, I pulled out the oil and supplies, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and dread. Gratitude because I hadn't had to fight the mountain today. Dread because this meant the wolf was actively aware of my schedule, my needs, and my movements. He wasn't just observing me anymore. He was assisting. As I started the long hike back, loaded down with supplies, I saw him again. He was standing on a granite outcropping about 50 feet above the trail, looking down at me. The wind was whipping his black fur, and his silhouette against the pale sky was breathtaking. He looked like the spirit of the mountain itself. I stopped dead in the trail, the heavy backpack shifting awkwardly. This time, I didn't feel the need to hide or ignore him. I was tired, cold, and immensely grateful. I slowly raised my hand, palm open, in a gesture that was half greeting, half thanks. It was a stupid, human thing to do, but I couldn't help it. He didn't move. He didn't bark or growl or even shift his weight. He just held my gaze, those pale eyes locked onto mine. Then he did something utterly unexpected. He dipped his massive head, a slow, deliberate nod. It was a subtle movement, barely there, but in the context of the deep wild, it felt like a profound acknowledgement. Then he turned and vanished over the ridge, leaving me alone in the silent, snow-covered forest. I finished the walk back to the cabin feeling energized, not just by the coffee, but by the confirmation. We had a bond. A silent, strange, utterly wild bond that defied everything I knew about nature and humanity. The next few months of winter were the hardest, but the wolf remained my constant, distant companion. I never saw him hunting, and I never saw him interacting with other wolves. He was always alone, always watching, always near enough to be a comfort, but far enough away to maintain the necessary respect of the wilderness. He was my shadow, my guardian, and my greatest secret. but the cold was relentless, and the spring thaw, when it finally arrived, brought with it a different kind of danger. It brought the humans, the people I had run away from, and I knew, deep down, that the wolf's trust, the silent, fragile thing we had built, was about to be tested by the arrival of the modern world. That test would prove just how wild and just how protective my silent partner truly was. The first sign of trouble wasn't a truck or a person. It was the sound of a chainsaw, a whine that echoed through the valley, slicing through the sacred silence of the bitterroots like a knife. And that sound was getting closer every day. That sound. Man, I'm telling you, that high-pitched whining scream of a chainsaw is the sound of peace dying. It doesn't just cut wood, it slices through silence, through tradition, through everything I had come to the Bitterroots to find. I heard it first on a warm afternoon, the kind of day where the melting snow drips off the eaves in a rhythm that makes you feel lazy and hopeful. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my mouth. It was distant, but unmistakable. And it wasn't just one cut. It was the steady, rhythmic wort chop of professionals working. I waited 2 days, hoping they'd be done. Maybe someone just needed to clear a downed tree on the county road. But the sound persisted, and it was getting closer, moving down the ridgeline toward the creek. I grabbed my binoculars and hiked up the nearest bluff, crawling through the damp, thawing earth until I had a clear view of the lower valley. What I saw made my stomach drop right out of my body. It wasn't just a couple of guys, it was a whole operation. Big, yellow machinery, a skidder, a forwarder, and 3 guys in hard hats and bright orange vests. They weren't clearing brush. They were clear-cutting. And they were close. Maybe 1.5 miles from my cabin, right on the edge of the public land boundary. I spent the rest of the day watching them. They were efficient, brutal, and they moved with the confidence of people who had every right to be there. They were using GPS equipment and marking trees with bright orange paint. I knew what this meant. Development, logging roads, maybe a small subdivision of rustic mountain homes, for people who want to pretend they're rugged while still having satellite TV. The whole reason I had fled civilization was now marching right up to my front door, smelling of diesel and sweat. That night, the wolf was back. He wasn't on the ridge. He was right at the edge of my clearing, closer than he had ever dared come before. I was sitting by the fire, reading by lamplight, when I heard a sound that wasn't the wind or the settling of the cabin. It was a heavy, rhythmic pacing just outside the wall. Thump, thump, thump. I blew out the lamp and crept to the window. The moon was nearly full, casting a pale, silver light over the snow patches still clinging to the ground. He was there. The black wolf. He wasn't standing statuesque this time. He was moving, running a tight, agitated circle around the perimeter of my small clearing. He kept stopping, lifting his massive head, sniffing the air and letting out these short, silent sniffs, trying to catch the scent of the intruders. He looked stressed, truly stressed. His sleek black fur seemed bristly in the moonlight, and I could feel the tension radiating off him, even from inside the cabin. He wasn't just concerned about the intrusion into the wilderness. He seemed specifically concerned about the intrusion into this space, the space he had tacitly agreed to share with me. I realized then that the bond had changed again. It wasn't just observation and acknowledgement anymore. It was partnership and defense. He saw me as part of the territory he was defending. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched him pace for almost an hour until, with a final deep exhale that puffed a cloud of steam into the cold air, he trotted silently back into the deeper woods. The next morning, I decided I had to talk to the loggers. Maybe they were unaware they were cutting into a sensitive watershed area, or maybe I could appeal to their sense of decency. A long shot, I know, but you have to try. I hiked down the valley following the fresh tracks of the machinery. When I got there, the noise was deafening. The ground was already torn up, mud churned into a swampy mess that smelled like disturbed earth and fuel. I found the foreman, a thick-necked guy named Randy, according to the stitching on his jacket, standing next to a massive Feld Ponderosa. "Hey!" I had to shout over the roar of the engine. Randy slowly turned, gave me a look that suggested I was a particularly annoying gnat, and pulled off his ear protection. "You lost, buddy. This is a restricted site." "I live right up the creek," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You're cutting awfully close to the wildlife corridor. Have you checked your permits? This land..." He cut me off with a dry chuckle, spitting a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the mud. "Check the permits. Yeah, we checked them. Own the land, buddy. Clear title. This ain't some tree hugger preserve. We're putting in a road here and maybe 8 or 10 lots up on that ridge. Gonna be real nice." "A road? This close to the creek? You'll ruin the fishing, the water." "Look, Grizzly Adams," he said, putting his hands on his hips and leaning in, his face hard. "We got schedules, we got investors, and we got guns. You keep your hippie self and your pet squirrels up in your shack, and we'll keep to our side of the creek. You got that?" It was a clear threat, wrapped in condescension. I realized instantly that rational discussion was useless. These weren't men who cared about the rhythm of the forest. They cared about board feet and timelines. I stood my ground for another minute, letting him know I wasn't intimidated, but I knew the fight couldn't be won with words. I turned and walked back toward the only sanctuary I had left. The next few days were torture. The sound of the chainsaws started at 7 a.m. sharp and didn't stop until the sun dipped below the peaks. It felt like they were chipping away at my soul, not just the trees. And the wolf? He was becoming my shadow in reverse. I couldn't see him when I needed him, but I knew he was there because the loggers started having bad luck. First, it was the cables. They'd leave heavy steel cables stretched between the skidder and the pile of logs overnight. Twice, those cables were found meticulously coiled and moved 20 feet away, tangled around a rock outcrop. Too heavy for a person to move easily, and definitely too neat for a bear. Then they started leaving tools out. Expensive chainsaws, fuel, cans. The items wouldn't be stolen, they'd just be moved. Found the next morning sitting high up on a granite ledge or tossed into the deepest part of a thorny thicket, just far enough away to be a massive inconvenience. Randy the foreman was furious. He started blaming me, saying I was trespassing and sabotaging his operation. "If I catch you messing with my gear, I'm calling the sheriff and I'm pressing charges," he roared at me one afternoon when I was checking my fish traps downriver. "I haven't been within a mile of your site," I told him honestly. He didn't believe me, but I knew the truth. It was the wolf. He was using his intelligence and massive strength to wage a campaign of minor, frustrating warfare. He was protecting the perimeter, not by violence, but by inconvenience. The tension escalated rapidly. Randy and his crew started bringing rifles with them. They weren't just for protection. They were for hunting. The crew was bored, and the presence of elk and deer driven down the mountain by the logging noise was too tempting. One evening, I heard the unmistakable sound of a high-powered rifle crack echoing through the valley, followed by a whoop of triumph. They had made a kill. This crossed a line, both for me and, clearly, for the wolf. Hunting for sport or convenience on the edge of my property, especially during the spring thaw when the animals were at their most vulnerable, was reckless. The next morning, I was splitting wood when I saw him. The black wolf. He wasn't hiding behind the pines this time. He was standing on a low rise, silhouetted against the morning sky, looking toward the direction of the logging camp. He looked right at me, and then he let out a sound I had never heard from him before. It wasn't a howl, which is usually mournful or communicative across distances. This was a low, guttural, vibrating growl, a sound of pure, coiled menace. It was a warning, a declaration of intent. Then he turned and walked purposefully toward the logging camp. I dropped my axe. I knew I had to follow him. If he attacked the men, they would shoot him, and that magnificent animal, my silent protector, would be gone forever. I grabbed my coat and started running as fast as I could, keeping to the shadows of the trees, heading toward the noise. I reached the site just as the sun was fully up. The bulldozer was running, idling near a pile of fresh logs. Randy and 2 other men were standing near a tarp, clearly discussing the elk they had killed the night before. I stopped about 50 yards away, hidden by a thick stand of fir. I didn't see the wolf at first, but then I heard the sound of the loggers' dogs. Randy had 2 hounds, big, loud, stupid things he used for tracking. They were tied up near the work truck, barking frantically. Not just the usual "I'm bored" bark, but a high-pitched, terrified yelp. Randy went over to quiet them down, swearing under his breath. "What is it, you stupid mutts?" he muttered, kicking dirt near the kennel. That's when the black wolf made his presence known. He didn't charge. He didn't sneak. He walked out of the dense underbrush onto the logging road, about 30 feet from Randy, with the slow, deliberate pace of a judge entering a courtroom. The silence that followed was absolute. The dogs stopped barking instantly, replaced by low, miserable whines. The man running the bulldozer shut the engine off immediately, sensing the shift in the air. Randy froze, his hand dropping slowly toward the rifle slung over his shoulder. The wolf was a breathtaking sight. He looked twice his size in the morning light, his black coat sleek and powerful. His head was lowered slightly, his shoulders hunched, and those pale yellow eyes were fixed on Randy with an intensity that would stop a train. He didn't growl, he didn't make a sound. He just stood there, radiating sheer, untamed dominance. Randy, who had been so cocky and dismissive just days before, was clearly terrified. He was a big man, but standing against that ancient, wild force, he looked small and pale. "Whoa. Easy, boy," Randy stammered, his voice tight. "We don't want any trouble." The wolf took one slow step forward. Just one. That was enough. The move was a psychological earthquake. It wasn't a charge, it was a statement. "This is my territory. You are trespassing." Randy didn't reach for the gun. He knew instinctively that if he made a sudden move, he wouldn't even get a shot off. The black wolf held the gaze for maybe 15 seconds, the longest 15 seconds of my life. I was ready to burst out of the trees and intervene, but I knew that would only confuse the situation. Then, the wolf did something that confirmed everything I had felt about our bond. He didn't look at Randy. He didn't look at the other men. He shifted his piercing yellow gaze just for a split second and looked directly at the fir thicket where I was hiding. It was the briefest flicker of acknowledgement, a check-in, a silent confirmation that his display was, in part, for my benefit. Then, with the same slow, controlled dignity with which he arrived, he turned and melted back into the dense woods, vanishing as if he had been a trick of the light. The air rushed back into the valley. The dogs started whimpering again. I stayed hidden, listening. "Did you see the size of that thing?" One of the loggers choked out. "That ain't no normal wolf, Randy." Randy, breathing heavily, finally managed to pull the rifle off his shoulder, but he didn't aim it. He just held it, shaking. "That's the devil himself," Randy whispered. "That black wolf. He's protecting this spot." "Maybe we should pack up the equipment near the creek line, Randy," the other man suggested nervously. "We got plenty of trees up on the south ridge." Randy didn't answer. Right away. He just stared into the trees where the wolf had disappeared. He had seen the spirit of the Bitterroots, and it had told him, without a sound, to back off. I waited until the men returned to their work, subdued and clearly rattled, before I quietly slipped away and hiked back toward my cabin. The wolves didn't need to leave feathers or break trails anymore. The message had been delivered with clarity and terrifying authority. The modern world had met the ancient world, and the modern world had flinched. But I knew this wasn't over. Randy and his crew were motivated by money, and fear only lasts so long when there's profit involved. They would be back, maybe with bigger guns, maybe with traps. The wolf had protected my peace, but in doing so, he had exposed himself to a threat far greater than a curious hermit. He had made himself the enemy of progress, and I was suddenly terrified for him. I reached the cabin and found the door slightly ajar. I had secured the latch before I left, and I knew the wind hadn't opened it. I drew my breath and slowly pushed the door open, my hand hovering near the old Winchester I kept above the mantel. The cabin was empty. But something was different. My small table, where I usually ate and cleaned my gear, had been cleared, and right in the center, stacked neatly, was a pile of firewood, perfectly split kindling, and 4 heavy logs, enough for the night. They were logs I hadn't split myself. I walked over and touched the wood. It was freshly cut, smelling of pine sap and cold earth. And right on top of the stack of kindling, a single black wolf hair, thick and coarse, caught in the fibers of the wood. He hadn't just protected the territory, he had come to the door while I was gone and done a chore. He was taking care of me. The bond was no longer silent. It was a covenant, sealed in fear and fire. I knew then that if the loggers came back with serious intent, I wouldn't just be defending my home. I would be defending my partner, my guardian, the wild shadow who had inexplicably chosen to trust me. And I would fight for him just as he had fought for my silence. I had run away from the world to be alone, but now I was less alone than I had ever been in my life. And the world was coming for us both. That black hair, caught in the fibers of the freshly split pine, was more than just proof. It was a promise. It told me everything I needed to know. The Black Wolf, that's what I started calling him in my head, capitalized, like royalty, was fully invested. He had faced down 3 armed men for my peace, and then, while I was gone, he had brought me firewood. He had done a chore. That's partnership. The silence that followed was heavy, not peaceful. It was the silence before a second, more serious storm. For 3 days, the valley was quiet. No chainsaws, no roaring diesel engines. I walked the perimeter constantly, my old Winchester feeling heavy and necessary in my hands. I wasn't looking for deer, I was looking for men. Randy was too proud and too driven by money to just pack up and leave. His fear of the wolf was real, but his greed, I figured, was stronger. He hadn't seen the devil. He had seen a huge predator standing between him and a fat paycheck. That meant one thing. He wouldn't come back to cut trees. He'd come back to kill the wolf. I felt a cold, clear dread settle over me. I had lived 5 years in the wilderness, learning to mind my own business. Now, my business was defending a creature who had decided, for reasons I couldn't understand, that I was worth defending. I started leaving the cabin at odd hours, walking wide, silent loops around the logging area. I wasn't a tracker, but I knew how to read freshly disturbed earth. On the 4th morning, I found what I was looking for, and it made my blood run cold. It was about half a mile from my cabin, down near the bend in the creek where the Black Wolf often stopped for a drink. The ground was rocky there, mostly gravel and hard clay, but right next to a cluster of willows, the earth was turned over. Not carelessly like a bear digging for roots, but carefully, like someone trying to hide something. I knelt down, scraping away the loose dirt with my knife. That's when I smelled it. A faint, metallic scent mixed with something sickly sweet, like cheap processed meat. Bait. And then I saw the edge of it. A dark, heavy length of chain disappearing into the mud. They had set a trap. A big one. Probably an illegal leg-hold trap, the kind designed to break a bear's leg or, in this case, the massive paw of a wolf. They were waiting for him to come for water or to check his perimeter, and they were going to cripple him and then finish him off. The rage that hit me was immediate and pure. It wasn't the philosophical annoyance I felt about the chainsaws. It was the protective fury of someone watching a loved one walk toward a hidden landmine. I didn't waste time trying to dig the whole thing out. I ran back to the cabin, grabbed a heavy iron digging bar I used for breaking ice, and sprinted back. As I ran, I scanned the ridges. Randy and his crew wouldn't just set a trap and leave. They'd be watching, waiting for the moment of capture. I had to assume there were eyes on me. When I reached the spot, I didn't stop to think. I jammed the iron bar into the ground next to the covered trap and pried it open, ripping the camouflage of leaves and dirt away. It was worse than I thought. It was a vicious, industrial-grade trap, the jaws lined with serrated metal. I knew I couldn't spring it without risking my own hand, but I could ruin the setup. I started smashing the surrounding earth with the bar, driving the chain deeper into the mud, bending the anchoring stake. I was making noise, a lot of noise, and I didn't care. I was screaming inside my head, come on, show yourselves, you cowards." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst, not just from the exertion, but from the fear that at any moment I would hear the crack of a rifle from the ridge. I was halfway through destroying the anchoring when I heard a low, sharp whistle from the bluff above the creek. Well, a voice drawled. It was Randy. Look what the wind blew in. The tree whisperer himself. I straightened up slowly, the heavy iron bar gripped tight in my hands. Randy was standing about 50 yards away, flanked by his two buddies, all three of them holding rifles. They weren't wearing hard hats now. They were wearing hunting gear. They looked serious, and they looked pleased. They had caught me in the act. "You're trespassing, Randy," I said, trying to sound steady, though my voice was shaking. "And that's an illegal trap. You know the fines for that." Randy laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Fines? We're on private land, Ethan, and that trap is for nuisance wildlife. You, on the other hand, are interfering with commerce. That's a felony." He raised his rifle slightly, just enough to make the point. "Drop the bar, buddy. We were waiting for the big prize, but you'll do fine for now. We can call the sheriff, tell him you were threatening us on our land." I looked at the mess I had made of the trap. It was ruined, but the job wasn't finished. The sweet bait smell was still strong, and the trap itself was still sitting there, sprung open but a deadly hazard. "This is about the wolf, isn't it?" I said. "You're trying to kill him because he scared you." "He's a menace," Randy snapped. "He's interfering with our operation. And you're helping him, which makes you just as much a menace." I knew I was in deep trouble. 3 armed men, and I was holding a digging bar. "I'm not dropping the bar, Randy," I said, taking a step back, positioning myself between them and the mangled trap. "You want to shoot me? Go ahead. But you're going to have to explain to the sheriff why a guy with an iron bar was more threatening than 3 guys with scoped rifles." It was a bluff, but it gave them pause. They wanted the wolf dead, not a messy homicide investigation on their hands. Randy's eyes narrowed. "You're pathetic, Ethan. You're risking your life for a dumb animal." "He's not dumb," I whispered, and then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from the trees across the creek. A snap of a twig. Randy heard it too. His head whipped around and his eyes widened. I didn't need to look. I knew. The black wolf was coming for his morning drink, drawn by the scent of the bait, and he was walking right into the middle of this mess. I had to act now. I had to break the silence, break the bond of trust, anything to keep him away from the trap. I lifted the iron bar high above my head and brought it down with every ounce of strength I had, smashing the heavy, serrated metal jaws of the trap. Crunch. The sound echoed loudly through the quiet valley. "Get out!" I screamed, turning toward the sound of the approaching wolf, my voice raw and desperate. "Go! Get out of here!" I threw the iron bar into the creek with a massive splash, creating as much chaotic noise as possible. Randy and his men were momentarily distracted by the noise, their rifles raised, searching the trees. The black wolf stopped dead. He was standing maybe 20 feet from the creek edge, completely exposed. He wasn't looking at Randy. He was looking at me. His head was cocked, his pale eyes, wide with confusion and maybe a little hurt. I had never shouted at him. I had only ever offered silence and respect. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, pointing frantically back into the woods. "Go! Run!" The wolf looked from me to the 3 armed men, and then down at the disturbed, ruined ground near my feet where the trap lay broken. He processed the scene in a fraction of a second. He saw the danger, and he saw my frantic effort to warn him. He didn't bolt, he didn't run away. Instead, with a speed that belied his size, he launched himself forward, crossing the creek in 3 massive bounds, landing right next to me, effectively placing his huge black body between me and the 3 men. The air shifted again, far more violently than the first time he confronted Randy. This wasn't just dominance. This was defense. The wolf didn't make a sound. He simply stood there, his back, legs braced, his head lowered, his lips curled back just enough to show a flash of enormous white canine teeth. His growl wasn't guttural this time. It was a deep, silent vibration that I could feel in the soles of my boots, a pure, terrifying promise of violence. Randy and his men froze again, their rifles trained on the wolf, but they couldn't shoot. The wolf was too close to me, and he was moving too fast. If they fired and missed, they'd have a wounded, enraged alpha wolf on them instantly. "He's protecting him," one of the men squeaked. "He's a mad dog," Randy yelled, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Shoot him." But none of them could pull the trigger. The image was too primal. The hermit and the beast, standing shoulder to shoulder, daring them to cross the line. I reached out slowly without taking my eyes off Randy and laid my hand flat against the wolf's massive shoulder. The fur was coarse and warm, and the muscles beneath were coiled tight as steel springs. The wolf leaned into my touch, just slightly, a mutual reassurance in the face of death. "You leave this valley," I told Randy, my voice low and steady now. I wasn't shaking anymore. The fear had been replaced by a strange, ferocious calm. "You leave this creek, you leave these trees, and you never come back. If you come back, I call the authorities about the illegal traps. And if you raise that rifle, I guarantee you won't get a second shot off." I wasn't threatening to shoot him myself. I didn't need to. The Black Wolf was my threat. Randy was trapped. He knew that if he tried to kill the wolf, he might wound him, but he would certainly die himself and maybe take one of his buddies with him. And he knew I wouldn't stop until I exposed the illegal traps. He slowly lowered his rifle, his face a mask of bitter hatred. "You think this is over?" Randy spat. "You think you and your pet freak can stop progress? We'll be back, Ethan, and next time we won't be using traps." He turned on his heel, signaling his crew with a sharp jerk of his head. "Let's go. We're done here." They retreated quickly, scrambling back up the bluff, the sounds of their heavy boots crunching the gravel fading into the distance. They didn't even stop to pick up their equipment. When the sounds were completely gone, I slowly slid my hand off the wolf's shoulder and knelt down, exhausted. The Black Wolf shifted his weight, and for the first time since he arrived, he made a sound. A low, soft whine. Nothing like the menace he had shown Randy. He lowered his massive head and gently nudged my face with his muzzle, sniffing my cheek and hair. Then he did something truly extraordinary. Something that shattered the last remaining wall between the wild and the human in my heart. He lowered his head to my hand, the one I had placed on his shoulder, and gave it a long, slow lick. It was a gesture of deep, profound relief and gratitude. A recognition. A thank you. "You're welcome, partner," I whispered, scratching him gently behind the ears, something I never, ever thought I would do to a wild animal. "You're very welcome." He stood there with me for a moment, longer, breathing heavily, the tension slowly draining out of his posture. Then, with a final, soft nudge, he turned and trotted back toward the woods, not vanishing immediately, but lingering at the tree line, watching me. I stood up, retrieved the iron bar, and looked down at the ruined trap. It was twisted and useless. The bait was scattered. The threat had been neutralized, but the cost had been high. I was now an open enemy of the loggers, and the wolf was clearly marked as their target. I knew Randy's final threat was serious. They wouldn't use traps or minor sabotage anymore. They would come back with a clear intention to kill. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the trap site, burying the broken metal deep, scraping away the sweet bait smell. When I returned to the cabin that evening, I wasn't just planning for winter anymore. I was planning for war. I sat by the stove, cleaning the Winchester, lubricating the action until it clicked smooth as butter. I wasn't a violent man, but I was resolved. If they came back for the Black Wolf, they would have to face me first. The wolf didn't show himself that night, but I felt his presence closer than ever. I felt the covenant of the wilderness wrapped around my small cabin. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. A desperate, risky plan that involved using the one thing I had that they didn't: my knowledge of the mountain and the trust of my silent partner. I knew the loggers would try to approach from the creek bed again. It was the easiest way to get close to the cabin without being seen from the ridge. I had to make the creek inhospitable, non-navigable. I spent 3 days working like a madman. I went upriver 2 miles above my cabin, where a small landslide had blocked an old tributary years ago. The water still trickled through, but the bulk of the debris, massive waterlogged logs and tons of rock, was held back by a fragile natural dam. I worked cautiously, using a long pry bar and my axe, widening the small gaps in the debris dam. I wasn't going to blow the dam. I was going to prime it. I wanted to create a situation where a heavy rain or a small tremor would unleash a controlled surge of water and debris down the creek. It was dangerous, back-breaking work, and I knew if the dam broke while I was there, I'd be swept away. But I had to protect the Black Wolf. On the third afternoon, I stood back, sweating and covered in mud. The dam was unstable. A serious storm would send a huge volume of water down the creek, enough to wash out the logging road near the old camp and make the creek bed impossible to traverse for weeks. It would buy us time. I hiked back down, feeling exhausted, but satisfied. As I rounded the final bend, I saw something that made me stop. Lying on the trail, right in the middle of my path, was a perfectly clean, bleached white bone. It was an elk femur, stripped clean. It wasn't a warning, and it wasn't bait. It was a gift of resource. It was the Black Wolf acknowledging my struggle, my work, and recognizing that I needed sustenance too. I picked up the bone. It was heavy and smooth. A strange thought crossed my mind. He was feeding me, in the only way a wild wolf could feed his partner. I carried it back to the cabin, boiled it clean, and used the marrow to flavor the simple beans I was cooking. It was the best meal I had eaten in months, not because of the flavor, but because of where it came from. The uneasy peace held for another week. I kept an eye on the weather. The forecast showed a massive spring storm system rolling in from the coast. In 3 days, heavy rain, high winds, the works. Perfect. I was ready to wait it out, hoping the storm would do my dirty work for me when the next escalation came, and it was the cruelest yet. It wasn't Randy and his crew. It was a different truck, a clean, white Forestry Service pickup, parked conspicuously down near the county road. The man who walked up my trail wasn't a logger. He was a bureaucrat. Clean-shaven, wearing sensible boots, and a clipboard. He looked completely out of place against the backdrop of the wild mountain. He introduced himself as Agent Miller from the State Fish and Wildlife Service. "Ethan," he asked, adjusting his glasses, "we received a complaint, multiple complaints actually, about an aggressive, habituated wolf operating in this area." My heart sank. Randy hadn't just retreated. He had filed a report. He was using the system against me. "Habituated?" I asked, trying to keep my face neutral. "I haven't seen a wolf in months, Agent. They stick to the high peaks this time of year." Miller didn't look convinced. He flipped open his clipboard. The report states that a very large black wolf is displaying unusual behavior, including approaching human structures and showing no fear of armed men. It also mentions a hermit living nearby who seems to be encouraging this behavior. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and professional. We have reason to believe this animal is either being fed or is becoming too comfortable with human presence, which makes it a danger to future development and livestock. We are here to conduct a survey and, if necessary, remove the animal. Remove, I repeated the word, tasting the metallic fear in my mouth. Euthanize, Mr. Ethan, Miller corrected me flatly. If we confirm he is a hazard, we have to put him down. It's state policy. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This was worse than Randy with a rifle. This was official. This was calculated. If they caught the black wolf, he was dead. You won't find him, I said, leaning against the doorframe, trying to look bored. He's too smart for that. We have tracking protocols, Mr. Ethan, Miller said, tapping his clipboard. We'll be setting up cameras and scent posts. We'll be here for the next 72 hours. We suggest you stay inside your cabin and let us do our work. Any interference with a state official will result in immediate arrest. He gave me a polite, meaningless smile and hiked back down the trail toward his truck. I watched him go, feeling utterly helpless. I could fight 3 loggers, but I couldn't fight the state government. They had the resources, the authority, and the cold, unfeeling bureaucracy necessary to hunt down a magnificent wild animal just because he didn't fit their safety profile. I had 72 hours, and the big storm was scheduled to hit in 48. I had to get the black wolf out of the valley, or I had to convince him to stay hidden until the storm hit, and the state officials were forced to leave. I knew where Miller would set his scent posts, the highest points overlooking the creek, where the wind carried the smell best. I couldn't risk going out myself to neutralize the posts. They would be watching. I walked to the edge of the clearing and waited until the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Listen to me, partner, I whispered to the trees, knowing he was close. They are here. They are not loggers. They are hunters, and they are quiet. They want to kill you. You have to go. Go up the mountain to the high passes. Don't come down until the storm breaks. It felt absurd, talking to the empty forest, giving tactical advice to an animal. But I had to try. I waited for a sign, a feather, a footprint, anything. Nothing. The wolf was silent, perhaps already sensing the new, clean scent of danger the state official brought. That night, I didn't sleep. I just listened to the wind pick up, waiting for the rain to start, praying for the storm to arrive early and strong. Just before dawn, the rain began. Not a gentle shower, but a cold, heavy deluge that hammered the roof and turned the creek into a roaring, brown beast. I looked out the window. Agent Miller's white truck was still parked down by the road. They were hunkered down, waiting for the rain to pass. I had to go to the dam. I had to make sure the surge happened before they had a chance to track the black wolf. I threw on my rain gear, grabbed my pry bar again, and started hiking upriver into the storm. The wind was a solid, physical force, and the trail was already dissolving into mud. It was the most dangerous hike I had ever taken. When I reached the tributary, the water was a churning, muddy torrent. The fragile dam was already groaning under the pressure. I only had to give it a little nudge. I climbed onto the debris pile, fighting the wind and the spray, the cold water soaking through my clothes instantly. I shoved the pry bar into the largest remaining crack between the waterlogged logs and pulled with all my strength. The log shifted. The sound was like a cannon shot, a deep, tearing crack, as the structure gave way. A massive surge of brown water, logs, and rock exploded forward, roaring down the tributary toward the main creek. I scrambled back, slipping on the slick rocks, barely avoiding being swept away myself. I didn't wait to watch. I ran. I ran back down the mountain, the roar of the flash flood chasing me. When I burst back into my clearing, drenched and shaking from cold and adrenaline, I saw the destruction. The main creek had swelled instantly, ripping out trees along the bank, and the logging road below was already buried under a foot of muddy water and debris. It was impassable. I looked down toward the county road where the white truck was parked. It was still there, but two figures were standing next to it, frantically waving their arms. They couldn't get up the logging road, and they certainly couldn't cross the raging creek. I had bought us time. I collapsed inside the cabin, shedding my soaking gear, utterly spent. The storm raged outside, and the noise of the wind and the creek was deafening. Suddenly, through the noise, I heard a new sound, a faint scratching at the door. I grabbed the Winchester, my nerves shot. I thought it might be Agent Miller, furious and demanding entry. I crept to the door and eased it open just a crack. He was there, the Black Wolf. He was soaked, his black fur plastered tight to his massive body, making him look sleek and powerful. He wasn't aggressive. He looked cold, tired, and completely trusting. He took one slow step forward, right onto my porch, and looked up at me with those pale, intelligent eyes. He wasn't asking for food. He wasn't asking for shelter. He was asking for refuge. He knew the danger was close, and he knew I was the only one he could trust completely. I hesitated for only a second. Everything I knew about the wild screamed that this was a mistake, a violation of the sacred boundary. But he had saved me, he had fed me, and I had just risked my life for him. I put the rifle down and opened the door wide. "Get in, partner," I said softly. He stepped across, the threshold, shaking the water from his coat. The largest, wildest wolf in the Bitterroots walked into my small, quiet cabin, and the world outside, full of chainsaws, rifles, and bureaucracy, was finally shut out. We had survived the first wave, but the final test was yet to come. The loggers and the state would be back, and they would be angrier. And when they came, they wouldn't just find a man and a wolf, they would find a pack, and we would be waiting. He stepped across the threshold, shaking the water from his coat. The largest, wildest wolf in the Bitterroots walked into my small, quiet cabin, and the world outside, full of chainsaws, rifles, and bureaucracy, was finally shut out. The air inside the cabin immediately felt different. It was heavy, musky, filled with the scent of wet pine and raw wilderness. I stood there, leaning against the door I had just slammed shut, watching him. He was enormous. In the close confines of the cabin, he looked like a small black bear. He didn't pace. He didn't sniff around like a dog entering a new room. He simply stood in the center of the floor, his head held low, his pale eyes flickering around the room, taking in the stove, the cot, the pile of books. He was tense, but not fearful. He was waiting for my command, or maybe just my acceptance. I knelt slowly by the wood, stove, and stoked the fire. I kept my movements deliberate and non-threatening. When I looked back, he had moved to the hearth, the warmest spot in the cabin. He lowered himself with a heavy sigh, curling his massive body into a tight coil, resting his chin on his paws. For the next 2 days, the storm raged outside. The rain became sleet, then snow, before turning back to rain. The world was a white-gray blur of noise and chaos. Inside the cabin, it was the quietest I had ever known it to be. I didn't try to pet him again, though the urge was strong. I respected the space. I ate my simple meals, beans and hardtack, and he just watched me. I kept a bucket of fresh water near the door, and he drank deeply when I set it down. There was no doubt now. This wasn't a transaction. This wasn't habituation. It was a bond, forged in shared threat. He was here because I was his only defense, against the organized danger of humans. And I was here because he was my defense against the intrusion of the modern world. We were a unit. I spent those 2 days talking to him, quietly, as I mended my gear. I told him about the loggers, about Randy's greed, and about Agent Miller, the most dangerous kind of enemy. the one with a badge and a policy manual. "They'll be back, Black Wolf," I whispered, rubbing oil into the stock of the Winchester. "The storm will stop and they'll come back to see what the flood did. They'll know you're still here, and they'll be ready." He just lifted his head, those yellow eyes fixed on my face, listening. He understood the tone, the urgency, even if he didn't understand the words. When the storm finally broke on the third morning, the silence was overwhelming. The sun rose over a world scrubbed clean, the air sharp and cold. The creek was still a torrent, but the rain had stopped. The Black Wolf rose before I did. He stretched, a long, powerful movement that spanned half the cabin, and then he walked to the door and nudged it with his nose. It was time. I opened the door. The familiar sight of my clearing, now sparkling with fresh snow and dripping pine needles, was a welcome relief. The wolf stepped out, took a deep breath of the mountain air, and then looked back at me, waiting. I had a feeling that the loggers and Miller had spent the past 2 days stewing in mutual frustration, and they wouldn't wait long. I grabbed my gear, a backpack with a thermos, jerky, and the rifle. I didn't plan to shoot, but I planned to be ready. "Let's go, partner," I murmured. We moved together silently toward the bluffs overlooking the old logging road. I kept to the shadows, and the Black Wolf moved effortlessly through the brush just ahead of me, his black coat making him nearly invisible in the damp shadows of the firs. We reached our vantage point, a high, rocky outcrop about 100 yards from where the creek had overflowed. We settled in to wait. It didn't take long. About an hour later, I heard the sound of a heavy diesel truck grinding its way up the access road, stopping abruptly where the flood damage began. I looked through my binoculars. It was exactly as I predicted. Agent Miller's clean white truck was parked right behind Randy's beat-up pickup. Randy, the 2 other loggers, and Agent Miller were all standing together, surveying the muddy, log-strewn mess. Randy was gesturing wildly, clearly furious about the ruined road. Miller, clipboard in hand, looked grim. They were a unified force now, greed and policy, working together to eliminate the obstacle. They were talking about the wolf. I could see Randy pointing toward the bluff where the trap had been set. The Black Wolf stiffened next to me, a low, barely audible rumble starting deep in his chest. I put a calming hand on his side, and he immediately relaxed, trusting my judgment on when to engage. Miller pulled out a pair of binoculars and began scanning the ridge, specifically looking for signs of the wolf. He knew the animal would be up high, watching. This was the moment. We needed to make a statement so clear, so undeniable that they would never dare come back. I took a deep breath and stood up, stepping out onto the bare rock face, making myself fully visible against the bright morning sky. "Randy! Agent Miller!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the surrounding peaks. They all snapped their heads toward the sound, startled. Randy immediately raised his rifle and aimed toward me. "Hold your fire!" Miller yelled, recognizing me instantly. "It's the Hermit!" Randy lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it ready. "You caused this flood, you crazy bastard!" Randy roared, pointing at the ruined road. "The mountain caused the flood, Randy," I corrected him calmly. "The mountain doesn't like chainsaws, and neither do I." Agent Miller started walking toward the creek, trying to get a better look at me. "Mr. Ethan, you are interfering with a state investigation. Where is the wolf?" I didn't answer with words. I took a single step back, and the Black Wolf, sensing the cue, stepped forward, moving until his massive black head was resting right next to my hip, completely exposed. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He just stood there, statuesque, his pale eyes locked onto Miller. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The loggers gasped, and Randy took 2 rapid steps backward. Miller froze, clipboard, halfway to his chest. The scene was perfect. The man and the wolf, standing side by side, a picture of absolute, unified defiance. Miller slowly lowered his binoculars, staring at the wolf. He wasn't looking at a savage beast. He was looking at an intelligent, calm, and utterly unafraid alpha wolf who was standing in protective alliance with a human. "Do you see him, Agent Miller?" I called out. "He's not habituated. He's not begging for food. He is defending his territory. And I am part of his territory." Miller slowly started to shake his head, the professional certainty draining out of his posture. He was seeing the problem with his policy manual. He was supposed to classify an animal that had lost its fear of humans and become dependent. This wolf hadn't lost its fear. It had simply chosen a human partner, and it was acting with pure territorial motivation. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Ethan," Miller muttered, loud enough for me to hear. "It's the Bitterroots, Agent," I replied. "Irregular is the rule up here. This animal is not a threat to public safety. He's only a threat to men who try to desecrate this valley. You want to classify him as a dangerous animal? You'll have to classify me too, because where I go, he goes." I paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. Then I added the final touch, the one that would break Randy's resolve. "The road is ruined, Randy. The creek will be impassable for weeks, maybe months. You can try to fight your way through the mud, or you can go up the ridge where the ground is firm. But if you come back up the ridge, you won't just see a black wolf. You'll hear the sound of a bullet, and then you'll see the wolf. You decide which comes first." I wasn't threatening murder. I was threatening defense. And I knew the wolves. Speed and ferocity would make them believe the threat was real, regardless of who pulled the trigger first. Randy looked from me to the wolf, to the ruined road, and then back to Agent Miller, who looked like he was ready to pack up and retire. "This is a waste of time," Miller announced, his voice tight with frustration. He turned toward Randy. "Randy, I can't justify euthanizing a territorial animal that is exhibiting no predatory behavior toward humans, only defensive behavior toward property intrusion. The report is inconclusive. I'm pulling the team out. Find another place to log." Miller climbed back into his white truck, slammed the door, and reversed rapidly down the road. The bureaucracy had folded. Randy stood there for a long moment, his face dark with rage and defeat. He looked at the vast black silhouette of the wolf, standing calmly next to the man he thought he could intimidate. He saw not a dumb animal, but an ancient force that had claimed this patch of earth. With a curse that carried faintly on the wind, Randy threw his rifle into the cab of his truck. He and his men climbed in, and the diesel engine roared to life. They didn't even look back as they drove away. The sound of their truck faded into the distance. Silence returned, heavy and complete. I stood on the rock face for a long time, watching the empty road. The threat was gone. Not just postponed, but gone. Randy had lost too much time and money, and he knew the authorities wouldn't back him up against a man and a wolf protecting their home. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around the wolf's neck, burying my face in his damp, thick fur. "We did it, partner," I whispered, relief washing over me in a massive wave. "We won." The black wolf leaned into me, a heavy, solid weight of acceptance and trust. When I finally pulled back, he looked at me, and then he let out a low, deep, satisfied hoof of breath. He turned and started walking back down the bluff toward the cabin. I followed him home. The intrusion of the world had ended. The silence I had craved for so long was restored, but it was a richer, deeper silence now. It wasn't the empty solitude I had fled to 5 years ago. It was the silence of shared watchfulness, of mutual respect. The black wolf never fully moved into the cabin, of course. He was too wild for that, too magnificent to be confined. But he never left the valley either. He became a permanent fixture of my life, a constant, silent presence. Sometimes, when the snow was deep, I'd find a fresh pile of kindling on my porch. Sometimes, when I was checking my snares, I'd find a freshly killed hare placed neatly on the path, never too close to the cabin, never demanding, just a quiet contribution to the partnership. I started leaving water out for him in the dry summers, and I learned his rhythm. He was my shadow, my guardian, and my greatest secret. I came to the Bitterroots running from noise and expectations, thinking I wanted to be utterly alone. What I found instead was a silent covenant with the deepest, wildest part of the world. I found a partner who didn't need words, who didn't judge, and who only asked for the same respect and fierce loyalty that I offered. The boundaries blurred. I was no longer just a hermit living in the woods. I was the human half of a territorial alpha pair. I had found my peace, and I had found my pack. And sometimes, late at night when the moon was high and the stars were blazing cold and bright over the Montana peaks, I'd hear him. Not the aggressive snarl he used for loggers, or the low warning growl he used for bears, but a soft, long, mournful howl that climbed the ridge and echoed through the valley. It was the sound of the wild, and it was a sound of belonging. I would step outside the cabin, stand on the porch, and listen. And I would always howl back, a sound that was less human than it was a primal acknowledgement of the silent, fierce bond we shared. I was Ethan, the man who ran from the world and found his family in the shadows of a black wolf. And in that wild, quiet valley, finally, I was home.